All right, so it looks like we are live.
Okay, here we go.
So, Peter, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
All right, my name is Peter Hitchens. I'm 57 years old. I'm a British journalist. I write a column for the newspaper called Mail on Sunday in London, which is quite a major newspaper in British terms. I've been doing this job for more than 40 years. I'm doing all kinds of things, from working on radio, just reporting to being a correspondent resident abroad in Moscow and Washington, D.C. I recognize these seven different countries. So I have various other bits of experience working in politics, diplomacy, and defense, and other specializations. So I feel, like most journalists, I know very little about a great deal, which is the opposite of the academic knowledge.
Cool. So just to jump right in, I'm an atheist, by which I mean I believe there is no reason to believe in the existence of God. Could you tell me some of the reasons you believe there are for belief in the existence of God? And then I'd like to tell you my position on those.
The most fundamental reasons to all beliefs are wishful. We believe what we wish to believe because we're not constrained by knowledge in areas of religious belief because there is no knowledge. You can't say there is or there is not God. So we're basically making speculations and expressing opinions about the nature of the universe. I feel a very strong desire for justice. I also do not feel that there can conceivably be justice if this life is always perfectly clear to any observant person of human society or in any human society in history that there isn't any justice in temporary circumstances. So if you are to hope for it, then it has to be eternal in nature. And the other thing that follows from this is that if the universe is just a great big accidental cosmic cast map, in which things all happen by accident, then nothing that you do has any significance beyond its immediate effect. And you don't really have very much in the way of responsibility, and life doesn't amount to much except to travel between birth and death. And I find that very unsatisfactory. I think Carl Jung said that once you reach the age of 35, your main concern is a search for meaning in life, and I think that that is broadly true. People do need to do, and they also need reasons to do things and not to do things. And I think without a belief in God, you're left floundering a bit there.
Well, I'm as an atheist, I still believe in objective morality, and I know many atheists that do. So why do you believe that you need a God to have that grounding? Because I mean,
well, I don't know how you can really decide what is or is not moral. And you know the story about the person who's causing an avalanche. After the avalanche has stopped, he has no way of knowing which way up he is. By the way, the tip in those circumstances is to try spitting and see what happens. You'll work out then where you are in relation to the ground. But most of us are in that position. We don't know which way is up and which way is down. There's no particular reason to believe that one form of behaviour is good and one form of behaviour is bad, unless the idea of good and bad derives from a set of absolutes, and those absolutes are beyond our ability to change. The moment we are able to alter them, which we try to do, then we alter them to suit ourselves. So you need an absolute, first of all, to just as you need magnetic north for a compass. If there is no magnetic north, the compass doesn't work. Just as you need a transmitting station to listen to anything on the radio. The radio is a fine device, but if nobody is transmitting anything, it wouldn't receive anything. What you are is you are receiving something, or you are experiencing magnetic north, and there is something absolute there which enables you to say this way is north, this way is south, this way is up, this way is down, this way is right, this way is wrong. Without that, you're basically making a subjective judgment of your own, which you will also suit yourself on all available circumstances.
Well, I agree we need an objective basis, but from my understanding, Most philosophers are moral realists, even though most philosophers are actually naturalists and atheists. So they believe we can get that objective basis in more abstract concepts. For example, like Platonism, you can get an abstract objective basis, or with certain kinds of philosophical idealism, you can get an abstract basis that doesn't actually exist. Or like, for example, the idea of a perfect triangle. Like we can say there is an objective perfect triangle, even if there is not such a thing to look at, and we can use morality as kind of the same thing, or an abstract.
A triangle is a much simpler thing in morality. And again, you're slightly, it seems to me, slipping by the question of which is the fundamental one: what is right and what is wrong. Why isn't it right to burgle from other people? Why isn't it right to mope on the street? Why isn't it right to cheat an examination? Why isn't it right to do all kinds of things which in a society with an established morality are generally seen as wrong, but which in many cases bring advantages to the person who does them?
From my perspective, I believe that morality is grounded in a description of the best of all possible worlds, the best way the world could possibly be, and we can see.
You're putting in the word "best" there, which is a presupposition. What do you mean by best? What is best? Best for who? And under what circumstances?
Oh, I would say
many material activities which are immoral under a Christian dispensation are nonetheless very advantageous to people who do them.
From my perspective, I believe best would mean like no involuntary imposition of will. That would be, if there is no involuntary imposition of will on anyone, that would be the best of all possible worlds.
But why?
I just go based off of moral intuition and moral progress. It seems like when we...
Intuition? What do you mean by intuition?
Moral intuition, when we see something that we intuitively feel is immoral. The most of a society, that's kind of the grounds...
That's circular. What do you mean by intuition? Why do you feel it's immoral? You have to know that something's immoral. You might feel it's immoral, but it's of no interest to anybody else. Unless there's a reason to know that it's immoral, then that's just a private thing. There's a very simple thing about morality. I'm talking about moral acts are very, very simple. For instance, I was brought up, for instance, if I was walking up a long train and people were coming the other way, it was tended you would stand back and let the other person come past. And this is largely died out in my country. So if I'm walking up a train, I stand back and other people are coming the other way, and I make way to let them go by. The person behind me thinks I've had a heart attack and just barges on straight ahead and overtakes me because he thinks I'm stupid. No moral action will work unless it's commonly accepted, unless it's commonly agreed, and therefore has to have a basis on which it's good. Because the other problem which you also, any atheistic person has to address is the problem of conscience. And we all suffer from things. But if it's not, if it doesn't have any divine origin, or if it isn't in any way attuned to a moral absolute, then you might as well listen to the protestations of your liver or your spleen. It doesn't matter. But the fact is we do listen to our consciences, and we are very much affected by them, and they do tend to have a very strong congruence with moral opinion, with Christian moral opinion, in fact. And that's why they're so troubling. And yet, in the atheistic universe, there's no explanation for that. And this is one of Immanuel Kant's problems. He couldn't, when asked to what really puzzled him, it was the blazing stars in the sky above and the burning conscience within. And these are things which are very, very hard to understand from a simple, ordinary material point of view. And I think that he was right.
Well, I agree, but I think that we can, what would be your grounds for it? If I asked you the same question, instead of grounding it in moral intuition and saying it's circular, what are you grounded in?
Well, I say there are laws which emanate from an Almighty God, and those laws have been set for us, most particularly in the words spoken by Jesus Christ during his time on earth. And that these are the basis of any and all workable and worthwhile moral system. And this is, to me, the most fundamental thing in philosophy, literature, understanding, art, and anything you care to name. It absolutely pervades everything.
So couldn't morality just be
the most important event apart from the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the most important event in the world is the Sermon on the Mount.
Well, couldn't morality be...
Nothing like it existed before us.
So from my perspective, morality could essentially just be an undiscovered law of nature, some facet of nature which causes us to act or feel in a certain way. And so it is, I agree, a law, but it's more of a law of nature rather than a law handed down by a lawgiver.
Well, you say that. I say it's not a law of nature because nature is in itself an expression of God. And God is immanent in all of nature, and therefore His laws will be expressed in every aspect of it. But you can't just pass it on to nature because you're dodging the question: is there or isn't there a God? If you attribute it to nature, you're basically saying, well, what I mean by nature, what I mean by God is nature. What I mean by nature is God. It is some sort of external, inalterable force which governs these things, which you can't control, and which hands these things to you, whether you like them or not.
Right. So my argument would be, instead of a theistic kind of a God, more of a naturalistic, pantheistic kind of a God, just an eternal, all-powerful nature or an eternal, all-powerful universe without the consciousness. I would see that as slightly more plausible than the theistic explanation, and that gives us a basis for morality.
Good luck with that. If that's what you want, I make absolutely no attempt to persuade other people of my point of view. I'll defend my own if asked to do so, and I object strongly to being told that because I have a religious belief I'm stupid. But apart from that, you're welcome to any set of beliefs you like. I don't think you'll find they work terribly well, but that's just a personal opinion.
Well, my position is that we can use the same arguments that are used by theist apologists to indicate naturalistic pantheism, which indicates the arguments don't actually indicate theism. Like if you imagine you have a box and you say there is a rabbit in the box, and your evidence for this is the fact that the box weighs 2 pounds. The fact that the box weighs 2 pounds isn't evidence of a rabbit, because it could also be explained by a weight or a coffee mug or Legos or any number of other things. And I see the arguments for the existence of God are kind of the same thing, that 2 pounds. It can be explained by essentially infinitely many things. You've just picked one and assumed that that's going to be the explanation.
Well, no, I've certainly picked one. I haven't assumed anything because the whole thing about a profession of belief is it's not a claim of knowledge. It is a profession of belief, and it's distinct. It's personal to me, and it's based, as I say, on my desire. I very much want there to be a God, because the idea of a universe without justice or purpose is terrifying and rather revolting to me. So I just want there to be a God, but it isn't as simple as saying that it weighs 2 pounds, a rabbit weighs 2 pounds, and therefore it contains a rabbit. It is, as I say, it's an expression of preference about what sort of universe you want to live in. I want to live in. I desire justice for others, and I'm compelled by that to desire justice for myself, because the only credible source of justice is an Almighty God, and if there is an Almighty God who's going to visit justice on other people, then He's going to visit on me too. So simultaneously, I desire there to be a God, and I'm afraid there's a God. But I'm not trying to persuade you of this position, because I would never dream of trying to persuade anybody to hold a different religious opinion from one they hold. It's just that's the one I hold, and that's why I hold it. I could discuss, if I wanted, the reason why non-believers so very much want not to be a God. The question which only I think among the atheists these days, Thomas Nagel is even prepared to address, because so many of them say, well, it doesn't even arise in my universe, which I think is laughable. But it's an interesting discussion, but it may not be the one you want to have, since this is your program. It's not the one you want.
Well, that's fair. I understand that position, but from my point, I also care about justice, but I see other ways to get justice without a God.
Find justice. What on earth do you base your idea of what justice is on?
Well, I base it on like an abstract idea of the best of all possible worlds. I think that is the basis of justice.
That just backs a little bit further into the mist. Best by what classification?
Any involuntary...
Who says it's best?
Right, so I would say any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. And so a world without any involuntary imposition of will is the best of all possible worlds.
Well, so what, you think that at no stage should the state or the law intervene by involuntary imposition of will on people who behave badly towards their neighbours and won't otherwise stop? You don't think that the police should be licensed to use force? You think there should be no prisons for violent offenders who attack their neighbours?
I think those are justified immoral actions, so they're necessary because of the world we live in, but I don't think they're moral. I think the moral option would be in a world which it's not physically possible to do that. So,
if immoral acts are acts that you can do, and that's all right, then what does it matter whether they're moral or immoral? The whole point about morality is that it tells you what you can and cannot do.
Well,
what you can do, and then say, well, actually, that was wrong, but I've done it anyway. This you may do, this you may not do, this you must do on some occasions as well.
right, what you should or shouldn't do.
No, must not. Must. On many occasions. No choice.
Well, for example, you can do immoral actions. That's why they exist. So it's physically possible. So it's an action you should or should not do.
But as far as morality, you must not do them. And if you do them, then consequences will come to you.
Right. So I would define it as simply the description of the.
But you can't say a society. You can't have a society which says, actually, we think it's morally wrong to impose penalties on people who steal from and attack and kill their neighbours and make their lives a misery. I can't imagine any moral system which would disapprove of actions crossing and frustrating the wills of others involuntarily of that kind that was workable or indeed any good.
Well, I see it as like a technological limitation. Right now, it is legal to kill animals because you need them to eat meat. But if we had the technological capability to feed everyone on the planet, well, then it would no longer be justifiable to kill animals. It would just be immoral, and we should punish people for doing it at that point because it's just an involuntary harm of the animals for no reason. But I think that same principle can be applied to every moral case. Like, for example, stealing from your neighbor. If we all lived in like a computer game or the Matrix or something, where objects can just be generated at will and there isn't any physical consequence, then there's no longer any reason to punish someone or put someone in prison for stealing from your neighbor because the fix is just easy. You just press a button and you're done.
Well, first of all, we don't live in any such circumstances, and we're not ever likely to. And secondly, that's not true, because the act of cheating your neighbour and taking something from him that is his, even if it can be immediately restored, remains a wrong action.
Right, but
itself, it's intrinsic in the action that it's wrong. It doesn't just harm your neighbour; it corrupts you as you commit it.
Well, I wouldn't.
One of the things about wrong acts. They are just bad for the person you harm. They're bad for you in the act of doing harm.
Well, I would disagree with that. I don't think there's any action that is.
That's what you think, but I happen to think very strongly that this is so. Many of the best reasons for not doing things are precisely that by doing them you corrupt yourself.
I don't.
Even if nobody living knows you've done them.
Well, for me, immorality has to do with consequences. It's only immoral if it essentially hurts or damages someone.
Well, I can see that. I mean, you'd have to be so sorry over it because you don't have any basis for anything else. But I think that if you examine, no doubt you've lived a life of blamelessness and perfection, but I certainly haven't. If I examine my life, there are many things which I've done which are known now to nobody living and may not have been known at the time, which I profoundly regret and which do me great harm. And they are, when I take part in the confession on Sundays, the burden of them is intolerable. The remembrance of them is grievous unto us. I say it with absolute sincerity. So they still make me shudder 30, 40, 50 years later.
Well, for me, like...
Moral actions harm the person who does them. That's one of the reasons why we're abjured not to do them. You move towards or away from God in my universe, in the way, first of all, in what you do, and secondly, in how you respond to it once you've done it. A readiness to regret it and confess to it is very important. The concept of divine grace allows forgiveness, but it's only in my view, after considerable penance. But you are damaged by it. You can't just undo the thing that you did and become again the person you were before you did it. It sticks. My experience, to say that's the life that I've lived. Maybe I've been doing it so long that maybe I'm nothing like as nice as you, but that is my experience.
Well, take an example like killing someone. Killing someone can be immoral in the case of murder, but it can also be moral in the case of protecting someone, or I would believe euthanasia would be a moral act of killing.
Well, you would say, I would say euthanasia is very much more complicated. There is in Christian thought I think isn't solely about war. It's fundamentally about self-defense, which is one of the very, very few circumstances in which it's possible to kill without breaching the moral law. But even then, you have to be fantastically careful about it. And I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I mean, an awful lot of people were sent out to kill in what they were told was a moral war, particularly between 1939 and 1945. But many of them came back very shocked and dismayed by the things that they had done, even though they had been told that it was necessary and right. And they were grievously harmed by it. People are. It's not an easy thing to do. So it's always going to be difficult, and you have to, say, devise a moral system which copes with that in some way.
Right. So for my moral system,
it's not purely utilitarian. Quite how you square euthanasia without imposing will on someone involuntarily, I'm not quite sure.
well, euthanasia is putting someone out of their misery if they're suffering a great deal. So they would essentially want to die or
that's
consent
how the
to it.
person who does it describes it. It's not necessarily how the person who gets euthanized feels about it. That's the problem.
Mostly, I believe they consent in the case of euthanasia, unless they're not capable.
The obtaining of consent, particularly among people who are very old and ill, is not necessarily as straightforward and wonderful and lovely as you might think.
Oh, right, I totally agree, but I believe the ideal there is that if they consent to being killed, then it's actually moral to kill them. It's moral to help them in their suffering.
Well, you think so. I think that it might not be, but it's an illustration of the difference between the two moral approaches.
All right, well, let's go into that a little deeper. Why do you think it might not be?
Well, I think that the commandment quite clearly says, "Thou shalt do no murder," and that means you can't just go around killing innocent people without a very, very. In fact, you just can't. You can't go around killing innocent people. You can kill people who are attacking you to prevent them from attacking you, or to prevent them from attacking other defenseless persons. But the problem of actually being confronted with a defenseless person who isn't attacking you and who cannot protect himself or herself from you, who you then kill, doesn't seem to me to be easily surmountable when set beside the commandment, which is absolute.
Right, so I would reject the commandment because it seems like the commandment isn't an accurate representation of morality. If someone is suffering...
Well, that's what you say. I can't do that, you see, because I have to look at it. I have to say, this is not alterable by me. What it says is what it means. What it means is what it says. If I start messing around with it, I'm breaking it. And so I can't. And the whole division between the modern secular world and the Christian world, in which man is made in the image of God and therefore life is itself sacred, is huge. And the biggest and most obvious instance of this, of course, is the general acceptance by the secular world of the abortion of innocent babies and the non-acceptance of the same procedure by Christian believers. It's a huge gulf between the two moralities, and there it is, and there it must remain. I can't shift from that position.
Well, yeah, but I like to compare them. So when I compare the two models of morality, the theist model and the atheist or the secular model of morality, and the secular model says euthanasia is moral because you're helping someone to end their suffering that they want to be ended. And theism says it's immoral to kill them and that they must continue to suffer regardless of what they value or want. It seems to be...
They must continue to suffer. It says that there are other measures can be taken to prevent suffering. Just as when you say that you cannot abort a baby in the womb, you're not saying that if the mother doesn't wish to raise the child, feels she's too poor or inadequate, that doesn't mean the child has to be forced on her. There are many things, particularly adoption, which are available as ways of allowing her to avoid a responsibility she doesn't want. And there's enormous advances in palliative care of the dying over the past 20 years, particularly in hospices, which make the issue of terminal pain much less horrible than it used to be. So no one desires anyone should suffer, but my moral law says to me I can't end their suffering by killing them. I have to look for another way. It doesn't mean I'm indifferent to their suffering or don't want to alleviate it or stop it. It just means I cannot believe that killing them is the answer to it. And there's no negotiation about that. That's the whole point about an absolute reality. There's no negotiating with it. You just can't do it. You must not. Thou shalt not. It means what it says.
It seems
extremely difficult and a great nuisance.
It seems quite obvious to me that if someone is in a great deal of suffering, which there are many, many cases of all around the world, that it would actually be moral to help assist them in their suffering. That death is actually...
Well, it seems obvious to you, and it doesn't seem obvious to me. And there's a difference between us. What I'm saying is the two moral systems are different, and they're profoundly different, and they tend in different directions. And these examples, which we're discussing now, are very obvious, prominent, straightforward examples of something which is much broader and much deeper and reaches into every area of life. But it's different, and the rejection of the religious absolute is something which a lot of people have embraced because it makes their lives easier, and I don't blame them for that. If that's what you feel, that the consequences of it is that you convert the universe when you do it into a wholly different sort of place from the one it was before. And I preferred it the way it was before.
So I still want to try and understand why you don't see that as obviously moral. Like, if someone is in a great deal of suffering...
Right, I'm not allowed to. My moral law tells me I can't just go around killing innocent people. And that's that. I just can't do it.
But isn't that circular, like you said earlier?
No, it's not circular at all. It's completely straightforward. It's just linear. It's a thou shalt do no murder. I can't do it. I'm not allowed to. I mustn't do it. And I can't make any excuses for it. And excuses such as say things, but I'm not allowed to do it. Can't do it. Sorry.
Well, you can't do it because God says so, and God says so, therefore you can't do it.
I can't do it because God says so. That's exactly right.
Wasn't that the definition of circularity?
No. Because I choose to believe in a God who says that. And I keep telling you, I've chosen this set of beliefs because for all its disadvantages and nuisances, I prefer it. I prefer the sort of universe which results from it, from the sort that you have. I'd say you're welcome to yours. I'm not trying to persuade you out of yours or to attack your position. Your position is coherent, rational, but in my view, mistaken. And I prefer mine. But I say you're welcome to yours, and I have no interest in trying to talk you out of it.
Well, you said that the universe that would come out of your universe, or that your belief system would be superior to the one that would come out of mine. Is that correct?
Well, that is my opinion. Yes, it must be opinion. It can't be fact. My opinion is, I say, that a universe which embodies justice, a universe which is purposeful and has had a purpose from the very beginning, and is fundamentally good, is preferable and is wholly preferable to, as I say, a cosmic car crash in which nothing matters, and there is no justice, and nothing to hope for, and it's all over when you die.
Well, why can't we have that, like, even in a secular worldview without a God, we could still possibly have an afterlife. Like, it's possible science could discover...
Well, you could, but I don't suppose you do. It would be odd. It wouldn't make much sense.
But
what would be the point about the afterlife is that it exists necessarily in the equation, because otherwise there is nowhere where justice can take place. It obviously doesn't take place in the temporal. So it must take place in the eternal. So that's why any religious system requires an afterlife for the exercise of ultimate justice.
Right. So, but from my perspective, the reason it's hard for me to believe in Christianity is specifically because of that reason, like the problem of suffering. It doesn't seem...
Okay, you're mixing up two different things here. You're mixing up theism, which is one argument, and Christianity, which is another. I want you have to first of all settle on whether you want a theistic universe before you start worrying about what kind of theistic universe there is. They're two separate choices. I happen to have chosen not merely to believe in a theistic universe, but to believe in a particular form of Anglican Christianity. The idea that I might conceivably persuade you to agree to both of them is laughable to me. But they are two separate arguments. One is a fundamental one about the nature of the universe. The other is, as it were, a set of appreciable rules and acceptable ways in which they're expressed, by which the individual can understand this and live his life as well as he possibly can. But there's no point in even thinking about what form of theistic belief you have until you've settled on having a theistic belief of any kind in the first place.
Oh, right. So when I'm talking about...
They're two separate arguments. Atheists often mix them up. So I'm not a Christian. I'm not arguing about that. I'm saying at the moment I'm arguing about whether there is a God.
Right. So I would think deism would be more plausible than theism, because an impersonal God would be more coherent with the fact that we see so much suffering in the world, as opposed to...
A lot of people find this easier. Theism was, for a while, very common among the American founding fathers, for instance. And Unitarianism was another intellectually very appealing form of religious belief. But the problem with them was that actually the bare, cold rationality of these things didn't accord with the experience of people's lives. Not everything is expressed in prose. Quite a lot of things are expressed in poetry and art, which is why they're so hugely important. Poetry, art and music and architecture are hugely important to religious expression, because so much of it isn't really doesn't accord with the rather narrow logic of the human material sphere, and can't be easily expressed in it. So I said, deism is and Unitarianism are appealing to the rational, intellectual, but they're not necessarily appealing to the human being faced with the world as it actually is, and trying to steer a course through it. Which is why they haven't, oddly enough, that you would have thought, they haven't been particularly successful. Whereas the more old-fashioned and obscure and dark and gothic and full of arches and recesses and catacombs religion is, the more successful it tends to be in actually entering the human mind. It's a paradox, but it's true.
Is there a difference from saying that if we look at the human experience, it's easier to explain from a God than it is from looking at like beauty and music and those kinds of things? Is that different from just saying, well, we experience this thing called hunger, therefore hunger must be grounded in some kind of a God?
Well, hunger isn't really... Hunger is a physical fact. I don't think it's comparable to the experience of listening to Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, or looking at a room full of Rembrandts and something. Or indeed reading poetry. That's not the same sort of thing. I'd say that was a category.
Well, for example, it's just a emotional kind of a response, but it seems like emotional responses...
It's not emotional. It's much... poetry will often bring out emotions in an extraordinarily unpredictable way, but it brings them out not because it is emotional, but because it catches at... One of my favourite bits of the Bible is, I think, Ecclesiastes, where they speak of how great men of the past found out musical tunes. Because it seems to me this is what we do, what great artists do. They just as great lawyers do it, they discover the architecture of the universe in various forms, and they express what they've discovered. But it was there before. I say that the second movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony always existed. Beethoven discovered it, wrote it down, and codified it, and therefore allowed all of us to appreciate it. An awful lot of things exist around us which we're not aware of. It always fascinates me to think the person living 200 years ago was completely unaware of all the radio waves and facilities which make it possible to transmit television and radio signals and mobile phone signals. But they were there 200 years ago. But the ability to use them was not. We have so little idea of what is actually going on around us in the universe, and such a limited understanding that it seems to me to suggest that we really only make stabs at working out what it all means. And it's the difference between prose and poetry is that prose will give you what appears to be a neat, logical understanding of it, but it may not necessarily be anything like a complete understanding of it, and it certainly might leave out the poetic part of it, which actually makes more sense of it than any other part.
Well, couldn't you say the same thing about the poetry? And maybe the poetry doesn't give us a complete understanding. It leaves out the logical aspects.
What it does is it tells us that we don't have a complete understanding. And language is hugely important. The word is the basis of everything. And poetry, of course, is an approach to language wholly different to the prosaic one, but it often communicates much more to people in prose, but it communicates it in a way which can't be expressed in prose and often isn't understood at the time by people involved. I put it forward, and most people who have any interest in poetry at all will find that as they read certain passages, they are suddenly seized with very strong emotions and are brought to tears, often quite unpredictably. And this seems to suggest to me that there is something in the rhythm of language which we only dimly apprehend.
Well, can't you say the same of mathematics? Like when talking about...
You could, yeah, you certainly could. I mean, mathematics to mathematicians is it's like music. It's enormously powerfully expressive of things which can't be verbalized. And I think real mathematicians, of whom I am not one, have a lot of fun with it as a result. Yeah, sure, I would. But you could say it about architecture as well.
So doesn't that also apply to the logical descriptions of reality in addition to the poetry?
Not exactly, no. And logic is logic. It's human logic. It's not divine logic. It's an attempt to apprehend by the limited human mind a universe which was created by a much greater mind than ours.
But if it applies to math, then it should also apply to logic. And our descriptions of logic can also bring people to tears.
No, doesn't mathematics become, shall I say, a lot less logical than people think it is the more advanced it gets?
Oh, quantum mechanics?
I don't know anything about quantum mechanics, but even prime numbers are rather mysterious.
Sure, and imaginary numbers. But it seems to me that when we look at the things, it seems that what you're describing applies to essentially every aspect of humanity, not just poetry and architecture and paintings and music, but to math and to human constructions and to stories and to all kinds of things that human experience. It just seems to be...
It does, yes. I mean, everything, absolutely. God is immanent in everything in the universe, and so that wouldn't worry me particularly, of course.
So, but if it applies to
even the extraordinary relationship between plants and the earth that you put in the earth itself and the way in which things grow is absolutely astonishing. This is one of the reasons why I'm uninterested in what are called miracles. To me, the whole process of life and growth and everything else is itself an easily visible miracle, which is so astonishing in itself. But I'm amazed people can observe it without thinking there must be something going on.
But what do you mean by that? For nature, the fact that life exists, it implies that there's something more?
Not just that it exists, but the manner in which it exists. The way in which things grow is itself the growth of a tree itself, when there's one membrane, the whole extraordinary process of the tree itself is to me so miraculous that it just makes me think that this is a universe designed and intricate, which it would be absurd to dismiss as anything.
So from my understanding, especially from the evolutionary standpoint, the evolution of the tree seems to be quite well understood from biology, and it doesn't seem to be as miraculous as it is scientific.
Well, if you're happy with that, you're happy with that. So I wouldn't want to disturb you away from any of that.
Well,
I just don't find it so myself.
When I look at life, the way that life forms seems to be quite evil because it's confined by survival of the fittest, killing other things and surviving the attacks of other things.
So, but then you were using earlier on the Leibnizian expression of the best of all possible worlds. But that is actually, it's a Christian apologetic position. These things are so because they must be, because if they were not so, it would be worse.
Right, Leibniz thought that this was the best of all possible worlds. I disagree.
Well, there you are. I keep telling you, I'm not trying to make you agree with me.
Well, wouldn't you think that if, for example, God could have created a world without, like, he could have given us an option. He could have said, well, you could go to this world that I've designed for you with all of the suffering and pain, or you could go to your own universe of your own design, essentially. Wouldn't that be a more moral system than what we have here?
Well, I don't know. It's not for me to say. The thing about God is that it's not... If you had made a creature inferior to yourself, it wouldn't understand you. You'd understand it wouldn't understand. And if we understood, we're so small in comparison to God. If we understood God, our brains would catch fire. The thing is vastly greater than we are. So it's useless speculation that if God had done this, that, or the other. If there is in the vast engineering of the gigantic and ever-expanding universe, if there would be moments where certain things happen which appear to us to be unpleasant, I think I'm prepared to accept the likelihood that the reason for the existence of these things is that the alternative would be more. That's just how I think. I'm not trying to persuade you. You're asking me what I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm just asking for your opinion. So my interpretation is that when I look at the world and I see all of the involuntary suffering, it seems to me that if there was really an all-good God, it would have given us an option to be in this world or to be in a different universe, and that would have been more moral than this just forcing us to be here, because that seems very much like slavery to me.
Well, that's your opinion. I don't agree with it. I can't. It doesn't make any sense to me. But again, you're welcome to it.
What do you mean it doesn't make any sense to you?
Well, it doesn't. I mean, what is the point of speculating on the mind of God, which is unknown to us and unknowable to us?
Well, I think if we can imagine a possibility that God could have done, that we could have designed, seems clearly better, that it probably the case that there isn't such a God.
Well, seems is a great word, but you have no basis on which to know. It's just, I'd say it's boring, idle speculation about the unknowable, which I find pretty sterile and uninteresting.
So,
I mean, carry on saying if you like. It just doesn't engage me. I don't find it illuminates anything at all.
So the problem of suffering isn't really a challenge for your faith at all. It's not something you've wrestled with.
Of course it's a challenge. I mean, the problem is that there it is. As I say, the Leibnizian explanation seems to me to be the nearest you can get to it. And also, we have to understand that what we do here matters somewhere else in ways that we can't necessarily understand. That we weren't necessarily sent here to be happy all the time, and that this is a preparation for another and better life elsewhere. So to say, well, things haven't always been great here, isn't necessarily a condemnation of the system as a whole.
I'm not sure I follow there, because if God is truly all-powerful, if we can criticize one...
You don't have any of the beliefs that I have, but that's what I think. That this is the traditional Christian understanding of this world is that it's a temporary veil of tears from which we emerge at the end to arrive elsewhere.
But sure, if the God is all-powerful, though, even one speck of one flaw at all would mean he doesn't exist, correct?
I'm sorry, what?
If there was just, since the God is all-powerful that you believe in, if he made one flaw or one thing is not as good as he could have, that would imply that maybe he's not there, he's not all-powerful.
Yes, but we're not in a position to know what he could have done. We're only in a position to express our opinions on what we think of what he has done, and therefore that's idle. But I keep saying this is not supposed to be where we now live, the circumstances in which we now live. This is not supposed to be the end of things, or the point at which the equation comes out. And the other point is that I believe that we are given the freedom to choose, and it's in that freedom to choose that so many things go wrong. God will try his very best to put them right within the powers that he has, but they will be worse than they would otherwise have been because of our insistence on defying his known will, which we do all the time, for instance by having wars.
Right, but all I'm describing is a world that we humans could potentially create. And so if we can create it, then God must be able to create it too, right?
I don't know what you mean. The world in which we live must of its essence and nature be imperfect. And there's no point in striving to perfect it.
But we can make it better. We can make significant improvements.
You could make it better, but better is very different from perfect.
Sure, but if we can make it better, then God could have made it better.
Well, no, God gave us the freedom to make it better or worse. And we very often use that freedom to make it worse, because we are free.
Well, sure, but if we have the freedom...
The freedom that we have is the source of many of the problems that we face. And we live a life so completely distant from what God intended for us. I tend to suspect that it's almost incomprehensible, or it's incomprehensibly different from the way we ought to be living. But that is what we do, and God makes the best of it insofar as He can. But the fact that we have this freedom to do good or evil is I'm afraid, leaves an enormous amount of room for an awful lot of opportunities for things to go wrong.
Well, sure, I agree. I value the free will idea, but God could have given us free will and essentially given every person their own universe, and we would essentially solve the problem. We all have free will, but no suffering.
But He didn't. So again, we're roaming off into this idle.
Oh, but we know He could have, because we can do that with video games.
Well, He didn't, and there it is. Maybe you can do it on your computer, but I'm just not interested in speculation about what didn't happen.
Well, sure, but to me it seems like because He didn't do that, He must not be very moral. Just assuming because this is the way it is. Oh, I think I lost him. Alright guys, I think that's it. Either I lost him or my points ran out or something. Alright guys, I'll see you later.